has led it to become essentially the default editor for most developers in the web community. With that in mind, we at Ionic have created an extension for VS Code to help developers along in their Ionic app experience. First, install the extension by navigating to the Extensions tab and searching for Ionic. Be sure to look for the one with the blue checkmark, and then click Install. With the extension installed and VS Code opened up into an empty directory, we can click the Ionic extension and create a new app. Options for Angular, React, and Vue are available, as well as various templates for each framework. Select the template that you want, and then enter the name for the project itself. In the background, the extension will go ahead and create your project and install any dependencies that you may need. With the app created, there are now various options presented. For instance, we can start our dev server by simply clicking the Run on Web button. With this button, we now are able to preview our app right inside of VS Code and can navigate around as if we were just using the web browser. To stop our dev server, we can simply click the Stop button and we'll get a little prompt saying that the web server has completed. For developers looking to work with iOS and Android, there is a Recommendations tab which will prompt you to add iOS and Android when applicable. Once a native platform has been added, we'll see options to open it in the native IDE of each platform. For iOS, this is Xcode, and for Android, this is Android Studio. We can also perform various configurations to the native project and the web project at the same time. For instance, if we want to change the bundle ID, we can click Bundle ID and type in a new bundle identifier for our app. If we want to change the display name, we could click on the display name and enter in a new name, and it will run the various scripts needed to update your project. And if you're a developer who likes to have scripts inside of your package JSON, don't worry, we have all of the scripts needed here inside of the scripts.
You know, watching Top Gun Maverick the other day and thinking about what the actors and film crew must have gone through to actually capture that air combat footage, it really hammered home something that's been pissing me off about modern movies for a long time now. A phenomenon that I could best describe as CGI overloads. Digital technology has advanced to the point where computers can conjure up just about anything our creative minds can imagine, from incredible alien worlds to terrifying monsters and death-defying action scenes. It's revolutionised cinema to such an extent that it's almost difficult to remember a time before it existed. And on the face of it, it should have resulted in a better end product. After all, CGI doesn't rely on actors hitting their marks or force directors to find inventive ways of making difficult scenes possible. It doesn't force stuntmen to risk life and limb to get that perfect visual. It doesn't require complicated pyrotechnics or sound stages or expensive and challenging location shoots. It's controllable, it's predictable, it's safe, it's cost effective, and well, it's boring as fuck. It feels like movies now are locked into a kind of never-ending dick-waving contest, each striving to outdo the other with ever more ridiculous, overblown, gravity-defying CGI action scenes, most of which carry all the weight, impact and believability of a left hook from Natalie Portman. And I mean the non-enhanced version, but don't worry, we'll talk more about that later. And that's not even talking about what the fucking actors have to work with now. Honestly, watch some of the behind-the-scenes footage of any Marvel movie. It's some of the most depressing shit that I think I've ever seen. Just actors standing around in big empty green rooms, having no fucking clue what they're supposed to be reacting to. This is it, boys and girls. This is the magic of movie making now. Now, before I go any further, I want to be clear that this isn't just some excuse to shit all over CGI as a concept, or the people that produce it. Computer animators are just professionals doing the job they're hired to do. They're usually overworked, underpaid, striving to meet ridiculous deadlines, and lumbered with the thankless task of producing something that only really gets noticed if they fuck up. I also fully acknowledge that CGI can be a useful tool when it's properly used, and there's been plenty of movies where it was genuinely difficult to tell what was real and what wasn't. That being said, it's not a magical silver bullet that can fix every problem, and when it's been rushed or poorly implemented, well, it can look like absolute dog shit. My general rule of thumb is that if you can do something with stunt work, practical effects or location shoots, then you probably should. Because believe it or not, humans have actually got a pretty good eye for this kind of thing, and the more you do it, the less engaging your movie becomes. Take vehicle stunts for example. Mad Max 2 from way back in 1981 gave us some of the most incredible car chases, spectacular wrecks and crashes ever shown on screen, to the point where several stuntmen were severely injured in the line of duty. Obviously that's a tragic accident, but it definitely pays off when it comes to what you see on screen. Every time a car gets flipped or smashed to pieces or blown up, there's a kind of visceral realism to it because, well, it was real. These vehicles really did get destroyed for these scenes. This poor bastard really did cartwheel through the air because he kind of fucked up his stunt. And the sequel, Fury Road, is probably one of the best examples of limited use of VFX in modern movie making that I can think of. It relied almost entirely on stunt work and practical effects, with just a little bit of CGI here and there to enhance it, and well, it looks fucking great as a result. Now compare it to this scene from The Fast and the Furious that was clearly done with wirework and CGI backgrounds. Notice the difference in terms of immersion and believability. It's basically just a live action cartoon at this point. Or how about this stunt from The Man with the Golden Gun? No special effects for this one, some mad bastard actually had to corkscrew his way across a river, and if he'd misjudged the jump by a few feet either way, he'd probably have earned a one-way ticket to the local ICU. Now compare it to this scene from The Transporter 2, where our man has to use a conveniently placed crane arm to remove a bomb from the underside of his car. Apart from looking fake as fuck, it's also ridiculous on a purely conceptual level, because you know that there's no way anyone could actually hope to time a jump like this. And it's not just cars flying through the air either. Look at this shot from Terminator 2, where a chopper has to fly underneath a freeway overpass. There was no computer trickery involved in this one, they actually used a real chopper flown by a fucking Vietnam veteran, and the shot was considered so dangerous that the film crew refused to shoot it. So James Cameron ended up filming it himself. And well, it pays off. It looks real because it fucking is. It's the same deal with explosions and pyrotechnics in action sequences. I mean, look at this epic scene from Hard Boiled, one of John Woo's greatest ever movies. All of this was done with squibs and blanks and pyrotechnics, and probably a shit ton of rehearsals to get the 3.5-minute sequence to work. If any one of these actors had missed his mark or fucked up his lines or forgotten his next action, they would have had to start the whole scene again. How many movies today would put in that kind of effort? Or would they just use multiple cuts and highly controllable CGI explosions to produce it in the quickest, safest and most efficient way possible? But what about fist fights? Well, take a look at the subway fight from the first Matrix movie. It's an excellent back and forth fight sequence with solid choreography that doesn't outstay its welcome and actually tells a cohesive story about the shift in momentum between the two main characters.
Well, one man who gets to set the global price of gasoline, and that guy is the President of the United States. Thanks a lot, Mr. President. So insane. Hey, sorry about that guy. He's just mad about high gas prices and has a deep misunderstanding of what causes them to happen. And he's not alone. Whether it's the media blaming Obama.
No, he's been nothing but bad. Gasoline prices nearly doubling since President Obama took office.
Or Trump.
Prepare to see some higher gas prices.
Yeah, President Trump driving up the price on crude oil.
Or just a bunch of grown-ass men who developed an interest in arts and crafts. It really seems like people have no idea how gas prices work.
This is all on Joe Biden.
Then it occurred to me that I didn't know how gas prices worked either until I took a literal class on it. So now I'm here to explain it so sticker guys and talking heads don't think the American president has some sort of Price is Right wheel in his office that he spins every morning to determine how much gas should cost. Hi, I'm Raleigh Williams, the sort of gas station Ryan Seacrest, and a climate science and policy master's degree recipient, and this is how gas prices work. Welcome to Climate Town. As you might expect, gasoline is not just some kind of mysterious juice that comes out of the end of an enchanted snake. It's a trillion-dollar industry. There's some f***ing paperwork involved. In fact, there's a whole government agency called the Energy Information Administration that tracks exactly what contributes to the price of gasoline, and there's basically 4 factors. And not to spoil anything for you, but how much America's president wants gas to cost is not one of them. Let's give it a look-see, Family Feud style! In 4th place, contributing to about 14% of the price of gasoline, is distribution and marketing. This includes the price you pay to get gas from the refinery to the gas station, paying the people at the filling station, and advertising the incredible 1/10 of a cent discount you're getting on every gallon of gas. Fun fact, filling stations have one of the worst profit margins of any industry in the US, making an average profit of just 5 to 7 cents per gallon of gas. These guys don't make their money on gas. Gas is just to get people in the door where they can make their real profit selling Funyuns and bingo. In 3rd place, with another 14% of the price of gas, is the cost of turning crude oil into sweet, sweet car juice, baby, which is fairly labor intensive and can also cost more depending on state regulations and corporate requirements. Again, the price of refining is fairly stable, so the only way to cut costs here is by appealing to the notoriously philanthropic nature of companies like ExxonMobil and BP and Shell. I'm being sarcastic. They love money. Those costs aren't coming down. In 2nd place, making up about 16% of the price of gasoline, are federal and state taxes and fees. That's the extra cost the federal and state government adds to gasoline to help pay for things like roads and bridges. And if you're thinking, hey, aren't America's roads and bridges absolutely falling apart? That might have something to do with the fact that the federal gas tax hasn't been raised since 1993. Now, state taxes are a contributing factor to variability across the US. California has higher gas prices because their state tax is one of the highest in the nation, plus they tack on some extra fees to try to account for the very real pollution that driving around creates. Which, you know, seems like a good thing to try to account for. And not for nothing, but the federal gasoline tax in European countries like Germany, the UK, and France, just the tax, is $2.80 a gallon, which makes America's 18.4 cents a gallon, or even California's 51.1 cents a gallon, feel kinda low in comparison. So they're not what's causing spikes or dips for the pinch at the pump.
The pinch at the pump?
The pinch at the pump.
The pinch at the pump.
And in first place, with a commanding 10-year average of 56% of the price of gasoline is oil, baby! That's right, we're talking Texas tea. I'm talking about that rock gravy, black gold, tank top and spank juice, pipeline piss, the old French Kevin, the old hot chocolate for cars. Any way you slice it, the price of gasoline is basically just the global price of oil plus a handful of add-ons to get that oil to you. And if you're still not convinced, get this son of a bitch. It's time to take a trip to Chart Town. Here we go. This is the price of crude oil, and this is the price of gasoline. And just for reference, here's a chart of the gas price versus tax, here's the gas price versus refinery costs, and here's the gas price versus distribution and marketing. Now, which one of these things looks like it's got the most impact on daily gas prices? So since price volatility of gasoline is almost exclusively due to price volatility of oil, maybe we should talk about how oil prices work. Now in America, we do drill and refine a lot of our own oil. But since every man, woman, and child drives around here,
Where were you going?
To the gas station.
How come?
Because I love reasons.
and underinvesting in public transportation is basically a national pastime, we're forced to import about half the oil we use from other countries. But you know what, I'm sure that's not a lot. Holy hell, that's 9 million barrels of oil per year? Wait, that's per month? Wait, that's per day? And please don't let that "wait, that's per blank" thing undermine your confidence in me. I actually wrote that into the script. I just wanted to emphasize that it's 9 million barrels of oil per day. And at 42 gallons a barrel, America imports 378 million gallons of oil from other countries every day, which to me seemed like a lot. So whenever a politician says they want America to be more energy independent, and then they shoot down laws that promote electric vehicles or minimum fuel standards, it really makes me wonder whether they understand how American energy independence works. Because importing millions of barrels of oil from other countries every day doesn't feel real independent to me. Especially when those other countries have a lot to say about how global oil markets should work. And when I say other countries, I really mean the most powerful group of work friends on the planet, OPEC. This lighting is not gonna work. Okay, all the way back in 1960, a group of oil-rich countries, including Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia, got together and they formed OPEC. And if you thought the O stands for oil, you'd be wrong. I know, I thought that was a layup to probably oil producing, and then, I don't know. But it's actually the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And they got together and formed themselves into a literal cartel. And just a quick note about cartels here. We usually only hear about cartels in episodes of NCIS, and it's usually just because some NCIS writer is trying to get out by 5 that day, and they need a shorthand for a group of people who's gonna cut you in half hot dog style if you try to cut them. It's also got a sort of cast of the OC goes to Mexico filter like this. Oh man, where are we, Juarez? But seriously, a cartel is actually pretty similar to a monopoly. The difference is a monopoly is one and a cartel is a group of entities that agrees to lower the supply or raise the price in order to control the sale of something. So by the early 1970s, OPEC countries had confiscated oil operations from private companies running them, and giant government-run OPEC oil companies absolutely dominated the global supply of oil. And when I say dominated, I mean like LeBron James in high school basketball dominated.
Finally an opportunity to show the elevation, the windmill, the creativity, the extension.
Uh-oh! Here's the truth.
See, in the oil game, there's this thing called reserve, which is an estimate of all the oil in the ground waiting to be drilled up. And as of 2018, OPEC countries were sitting on 79.4% of all the oil estimated to be in the ground. And that's actually pretty important, because even though America is currently drilling oil as fast as humanly possible, OPEC has a very deep bench. Oh, and one more thing. OPEC recently added a little country called Russia to the cartel. And OPEC, Russia, and a few other countries recently rebranded themselves as OPEC+. OPEC+ now holds the keys to 90% of all the world's proven oil reserves and 55% of the active oil supply on the global market. Now, 55% does not give you unfettered control over all things oil, but it does give you an incredible amount of leverage in the global market. So while the United States might be the largest single country producer, OPEC Plus combines over 20 oil exporting countries, including Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Russia, and the result is a cartel that truly has global oil by the balls. Russia, weird. I feel like Russia's been in the news lately. Did they have like a hockey team that rescued a bunch of Filipino kids from a cave? No. They invaded the sovereign nation of Ukraine, and also gas prices went way up, and I wonder if those two things are related. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. They super are. But just because OPEC controls 80% of the world's oil reserves does not mean they get to just name their price. Oil price is based on global supply versus demand. Demand tends to go up when things are good and people are driving and constructing buildings and doing sweet donuts in the parking lot. And demand tends to go down when things are bad, people are not constructing buildings, and carving a sweet donut in the local Barnes & Noble overflow lot is just for special occasions. Now, OPEC does not control demand, but they do get to mess with supply by determining how much oil OPEC countries allow into the market, which can seriously affect the price of oil. In fact, one time in 1973, OPEC was pissed at America. They didn't let America have any oil, and it caused a massive spike in prices, and cars lined up around the block to get gas.
No, they did not. No man ever
8 o'clock. We were supposed to pump at 8 o'clock.
It was pandemonium, and ask your parents, because apparently they freaked the absolute fuck out, okay? It was like the Red Scare and Y2K had a baby. And if you didn't understand any of that sentence, how do I put this? You're probably gonna be the one solving climate change, so thank you so much for your service, and we're sorry.
And then after, thank you for your service, and then go.
Yeah, and that's the cut, yeah. Anyway, OPEC and the other global oil producers, which includes private American companies, get to control the supply of oil. And based on global demand, a per barrel oil price is set. Now, it's not identical in every country all over the world, but since oil is a commodity that can be piped or shipped alarmingly quickly anywhere on the planet, it stays relatively consistent across the globe at any given time. Now remember, gas price volatility is basically just oil price volatility. And oil price volatility happens whenever there are disruptions in the global supply or demand of oil. For instance, when America invaded Iraq in 2003 and disrupted their ability to get oil, the price of gas went up in America. Global markets knew that a country at war might not be able to supply the same amount of oil, so people wanted to stock up on oil as a precaution, causing the demand to go up, causing the price to go up. And yes, this is a gross oversimplification of how it really works. It's really more of a series of feedback loops that put pressure on the system in different ways, as detailed by Janella Meadows in the book Thinking in Systems. Read it if you can. And speaking of a gross oversimplification of how things work, I now present the past 20-ish years of the global oil market. But first, we gotta take a trip back to Chartown, baby.
Hot crackers, oil prices are coming up fast in the early 2000s. It's instability in the Middle East, and the invasion of Iraq reduces OPEC supply, and oh no, here comes Hurricane Katrina, absolutely ham-yammying the oil refineries in the Gulf Coast. Global supply goes down, and what's this? Global demand for oil is surging due to the emerging markets in Asia. We've got ourselves a good old-fashioned price increase, friendos. More global tension from North Korean nuclear testing, Israel and Lebanon at war, and 1,000 other problems give oil markets the heebie-jeebies. They want to buy that oil. Demand spikes, and oil is $100 a barrel, $120 a barrel, $140 a barrel. Good Charlotte, that's an expensive barrel. And since every major form of transportation and construction is addicted to oil, every government, business, and individual in the world has no choice but to buy that oil at outrageous prices. Companies' budgets are stretched razor thin, and any little snap could force them into bankruptcy. But I think things are going to be just fine for the year 2008. Oh no! The U.S. housing market crashes and the global recession tips business after business into bankruptcy. Demand for oil plummets and oil prices crash to $32 a barrel. Things are terrible, but the world economy is clawing its way back and demand increases. Then we've got the Arab Spring and the collapse of Libya taking millions of barrels of oil off the market. Supply goes down. You know what that means. The price of that good old French Kevin just went up. Oh, here comes Russia attacking Ukraine in 2014. Supply goes down, prices go up, but wait a minute, what's that sound? It's the fracking boom from the USA, and they're fracking the absolute molasses out of North Dakota and the Permian Basin, flooding the market with oil. But as supply goes up and prices go down, a bunch of those U.S. fracking companies go out of business because fracking isn't profitable and oil is under $60 a barrel. Talk about boom and bust, baby! Plus, it turns out there's a whole bunch of other problems with fracking, and now OPEC is playing chicken with U.S. fracking companies and also a million other factors, and oh my God, what a ride. But if I know my stuff, 2020 is going to be smooth sailing forever.
And then knock. It's a global pandemic, and everything shuts down. People aren't flying, people aren't driving, construction projects stop, and the parking lot donut is placed on the critically endangered list. The world economy stalls, and for the first time ever, the supply and demand of oil was so utterly out of whack that the price of oil went negative for a day. But even though oil prices went back into the positive the next day, prices were still so crazy low for gasoline that some places were selling it for 85 cents a gallon. What is this, 1993? Seriously though, 2020 looked like bad news for oil companies. But they stopped drilling, they got over $10 billion in government bailouts, and one other thing, was it they used the money to keep their employees on the payroll? Oh no, I'm sorry, it was the opposite of that. They actually fired 100,000 employees. But don't worry, oil companies in 2020 had a better year than they did in 2016. So as 2021 rolled around and a shaky recovery started, oil companies had a choice. They could choose to invest that money in drilling, hire back the people they laid off, and increase supply, or they could not hire those people back, not drill, and restrict supply, forcing oil prices way up. And which one of those things do you think oil companies did? American oil companies did stock buybacks, executive bonuses, and purposely didn't rehire their workforce as a way to maximize profits. And of course they did. They're oil companies. This is almost too dumb to say, but oil companies like when oil prices are high. They sell oil for money. And since drilling operations slowed down as a result of the pandemic, they now get to enjoy massive oil profits as they slowly ramp drilling back up. And if you don't believe me, just ask oil companies.
Would Pioneer, in that scenario, potentially increase production to help make up any potential shortfall?
No, Pioneer will stay with our plan. We announced a CapEx plan. As I said, regardless of whether it's $150 oil, $200 oil, or $100 oil, we're not going to change our growth plans.
We will continue to prioritize free cash flow generation over the pursuit of volume growth. We have no intention of adding incremental barrels into the market.
So if the president phoned you up, Scott, and said, you know what, we need some more oil, what are you going to say to him?
I'll tell him we have a pact with it's all about the shareholders. Our shareholders own this company. They want a return of cash. We know.
Weird stuff. And I mean, it's especially weird considering they'll say all that stuff and then they'll immediately run onto Fox News and straight up lie to whoever will listen in order to perpetuate this myth that Biden has some kind of magic button that controls oil prices.
But this is all because of the absolute war that the Joe Biden administration has begun to wage on the oil and gas industry.
We have no intention of adding incremental barrels into the market.
Biden's closure of pipelines because of shutting down leases and things like that.
We're not going to change our growth plans.
Eco-freaks and far-left anti-West academics are making him do whatever they want.
Because I love reasons.
Don't get me wrong, Biden is a real wet sandwich of a president, and there's a lot of stuff to attack him about, but oil prices are not one of them.
And then we go to cars with windmills in their back seats.
Just a bunch of rascals selling their tank top and spank juice. What could that guy possibly think we're talking about? Wow, I want to know. We should track him down. But But you don't actually have to know what tank top and spank juice is to know that gas prices haven't really gone back down to pre-pandemic levels, and that's because the globe's oil suppliers are perfectly fine prioritizing short-term profit over actually increasing supply. Oh, they'll pretend that they're being held down by the man and all these regulations, but that's actually a lie. I made a whole video about this, and it turned out pretty good, so you should consider watching it. But the TLDR is that the big dogs like BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Shell are posting record high profits, but spending record low amounts actually drilling and reinvesting in their company. Couple artificially low supply with supply chain issues and a double dose of inflation, and gas prices are just cruising. And then Russia started threatening Ukraine. And even though they pinky promised that they weren't preparing for some kind of war, oil commodity markets kind of freaked out because it sure looked like they were preparing for some kind of war. They started buying up oil, meaning demand went up, meaning price went up, meaning gas prices shot through the roof. And it turned out, oh man, there was a second roof above that roof, and we discovered that when Russia actually invaded Ukraine and gas prices shot through that roof. Global supply shrinks because, war, plus international sanctions against Russia, plus Russian retaliates by withholding exports, plus even more war-related supply problems. So unless you're watching this video in the distant future, that's pretty much where we are today. So, the time has come. Who actually controls gas prices? Nobody! And also, kind of everybody at the same time. It's complicated, is the point that I'm making here. Look, I just blitzed through 20 years of oil history, and you might have noticed the entire world is addicted to oil. And the fact that 70+ countries export oil and every country uses oil means that no individual, no matter how powerful, can just sort of step in and change gas prices. Now, I'm not saying nobody can influence gas prices. OPEC Plus and the world's oil majors make their living trying to influence oil and gas prices. But for all the influence LeBron James has over a game of basketball, he doesn't get to actually choose who wins or loses. Remember, billions of people are using oil every day. So even though presidents and world leaders have some minor tools available to them, there's no guarantee what the result of those tools is gonna be. Pandemic bailouts were intended to keep gas prices down, but they resulted in record high profits for oil companies and record high gas prices. The invasion of Iraq was, at least according to our own generals,
to secure Iraq's oil fields,
but prices spiked anyway. The oil market is a complex system, and complex systems by their very nature are impossible to predict. But it's not hard to see how much oil companies benefit from the whole globe being completely addicted to fossil fuels. So the next time you pull up to the gas pump and prices are high, which, let's face it, it's probably right now, just ask yourself one thing. Who actually benefits from high gas prices? Is it the companies that sell gas and make a big profit off high prices? Or just the most recent winner of the Tostitos US presidential election? Because as unfortunate as it is, global oil prices, and gas prices by extension, are almost completely governed by global demand, plus whatever global suppliers think they can get away with. Which, as it turns out, is quite a lot. And the only way out of this rigged system is to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. The only way to do that is a complete all-system switch to electrification. And of course, before somebody jumps on to tell me that sometimes electricity is made using fossil fuels, I f***ing know that, okay? There's more than one problem with the world. I also think electricity should be made using renewable energy. And if you're interested in ways you can get involved, there are a whole bunch of links in the bio to groups focused on greening the power grid and general electrification. I highly encourage you to join some of these groups, but above all, just consider getting more educated about the climate crisis. Links in the bio, but this isn't a video about that. It was just a video about who controls gas prices, and I hope you came away with a conclusion that it's nobody, because the system is too complicated. But it's not a system we should be involved in, so we should move away from it as soon as possible. And with that is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching Climate Town. I really if you like what you see and you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page where you can donate like $5 a month, and it just helps us make these videos faster and better. We also just put out like this rap that was a parody of a different rap from like the 80s where this gas company, it's complicated, but I promise if you sign up for the Patreon, it's on there, you can check it out. And if that's not enough incentive, I don't know what is. We also have a Discord server and a very active community of people discussing previous topics we've done episodes on, and new topics, and it's all very empowering and cool, and I encourage you to check it out if you feel like it. But more than anything, thank you for watching this episode. I'll see you next time.
I have not tried marijuana. I have never used it.
actors, and while there's definitely wire work involved, it's still very much two actors fighting in a real physical location. Every kick and punch has actual weight behind it, and the sets look solid and convincing because they actually exist. They're not just some flat, soulless background that was composited in later. Skip forward a few years to their final battle in the Matrix Revolutions, and what do you get? A CGI Neo and a CGI Smith endlessly punching each other while flying through a CGI city in the CGI pouring rain. You see how much less involving and engaging it is? You see how constantly trying to up the stakes and spectacle actually makes it harder to connect with what's going on? Shit man, Star Wars fell victim to this kind of thing decades ago. The lightsaber fights between Luke and Vader in AOT weren't big choreographed affairs with incredible moves and spectacular effects shots. Most of the time they were fighting in dimly lit rooms and corridors. It was tight and claustrophobic and clumsy at times, but it worked because it was more about the emotions of the two characters than the moves they could pull off. The physical constraints of the time forced the director to focus more on the emotion of the characters, and it paid off. Then compare it to the fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith. That shit's got them flying and leaping all over the place in CGI form, pulling off very obviously choreographed moves, and battling through crazy spectacular landscapes for what feels like 15 minutes straight. It reeks of excess and over-the-top spectacle at the expense of good storytelling, and it pretty much exemplifies the lesson that bigger isn't always better. But what about creatures and monsters, you might ask? I mean, we've been fascinated with stuff like that since the dawn of cinema. What's scarier than a good monster? Well, terrifyingly bad CGI. And no, I'm not even going into the obvious stuff like the hilariously shit Scorpion King. First up, let's look at two examples from the same director, Peter Jackson, best known as the director of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, the orcs from the Lord of the Rings were actually done with practical effects. This dude right here was put together with prosthetics and makeup, and I think we could all agree he looks pretty damn good. The makeup effects, the armor, the size and build, even the contact lenses on the eyes, they all add up to a pretty convincing character on screen. He's still vaguely humanoid, but monstrous and deformed at the same time, a bit like your average nightclub goer in Aberdeen. Now consider a similar antagonist from the Hobbit trilogy, made more than a decade later and relying more heavily on CGI. You see how boring and lifeless his face looks now? How there's no real detail or expression in his features, his clothes, or his overall appearance? He's just this dull grey blob that does absolutely nothing. He's not intimidating and he's not interesting, and in fact it's very obvious that he doesn't even exist. I know which one I'd rather have in my movie. Damn man, we're even using CGI on actors themselves now, like Natalie Portman, who in reality looks like she's been on hunger strike for 3 weeks straight. But what's a girl to do when she's forced to play a big buff goddess of thunder? Does she go through months of intense physical training and dieting to build herself up, just like her male co-star? Or does she just show up as she is and let the CGI department give her the body she couldn't be bothered building for herself? I think we all know the answer to that one. Now, I could probably prattle on for hours about this shit, giving you example after example of practical effects winning out over CGI, but I think you get the point I'm making here. The more movies rely on CGI, the less engaging the experience becomes for the audience, because deep down, they know there's really nothing behind it. Yeah, there's a shit ton of work involved to make it look convincing, and I'm not trying to take anything away from the animators here, but it's not the same kind of work that has to go into shooting a continuous 5-minute action sequence where a single mistake can mean having to restart the whole thing from scratch. It's not the same as actors and stunt performers having to risk injury or death to capture some breathtaking stunts, and it's not the same as actors having to lumber around the set wearing heavy prosthetics or spend hours in the makeup chair to achieve the right result on screen. Yeah, computer animation can overcome the physical limitations of practical effects, but what's the point if nobody actually buys into what they're seeing? CGI absolutely has its place in modern movie making. In fact, it's a vital weapon in the arsenal of most filmmakers now, allowing them to show things that would be almost impossible to achieve any other way, but it's not a magical solution to every problem. It's not there to turn live action movies into tightly controlled animating features with occasional appearances from real actors. It should be used to enhance practical effects, not to replace them. If you suck all of the risk and challenge and inventiveness out of movie making and try to replace it with sterile animated spectacle, then you take away the most important aspect of movies altogether, the humanity. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a price that I'm not willing to pay. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
Hello everyone, so let's discuss my video about electric buses. First off, I'd like to thank everyone for all the feedback. It's really good to see how polite everyone was about their disagreement, so good job. Second, some self-critique. My video about electric buses really wasn't that great. As some people have pointed out, it felt way too shallow and not so well thought out. I agree. In general, I should have been far more thorough. This follow-up video will hopefully correct that. And I think the best way to address criticism and fill in the gaps is to address EEVblog's video response, because he brings up most of the main recurring points I saw from other people. His video is linked in the description, so feel free to check it out. The first point I'd like to address from EEVblog is the trolleybus wires.
Look at these, like, daggy wires. And sure, you do tend to, like, just ignore them after a while, but it's the same with power poles as well. If you ever lived in an area, grew up in an area with power poles, you just, like, tend to ignore all the power wires going everywhere. As then, if you live in a place which has underground power, and then you go back to the power lines, you really notice them. No thanks. We're better off without the wires.
So according to EEVblog, trolleybus wires cause visual pollution. I admit this point is completely subjective, but aren't we sitting on the horse backwards here? On the street view image, EEVblog points to all the wires above, saying how ugly they look. If you're bothered by that, fair enough. But what about the things below the wire? It's a sea of grey and black asphalt full of metal boxes, which is the new norm in our cities ever since mass motorization started. I feel like aesthetic considerations about trolleybus wires shouldn't be a priority. Personally, I think trolleybus wires are fine. And this is a good example of how modernization and tech disruption can lead to huge societal changes like in urban development. Such disruptions extend across all facets of our society and have revolutionized virtually every industry, except for one, the art industry. Antiquated, opaque, and difficult to enter, the art world is governed by two 250-plus-year-old firms. Rather, it was until now, because there is a fintech platform called Masterworks that's turning the art market on its head and giving access to everyone, not just the billionaires of the world. With Masterworks, you can invest in the same art billionaires do. Imagine buying a share in a Banksy or Monet artwork without having to spend millions on buying the whole thing. And now, back to the video. EEVblog's second point about trolleybus wires is that they are problematic to build out due to red tape and costs.
Why don't we just install the wires? The first is practicality and infrastructure cost and the red tape to get all of this stuff to happen. You can't just go stringing up lines willy-nilly. It's not that easy.
In terms of red tape, that depends fully on local regulation. In Europe, it's generally not a problem, and it shouldn't be that much more difficult in other places either. After all, they're putting up the wires above existing right away. Unless there are some exotic local regulations, this should not be a problem. In terms of costs, well, more on that later. But you can see on EEV's screen right here how the wires are integrated into existing infrastructure, like the poles. In my original video, you could see how they use the building's facades. Trolleybus wires aren't complicated to put up. Let's remember this point for later.
Okay, so he's talking about battery fires. If that's your argument, well, diesel buses do it too, and gas buses as well. The article this year, why are Sydney buses still going up in flames and what can be done about it? There it is there. It doesn't look good, does it? And ironically, it's the batteries in these diesel buses that are a good proportion of the fires in this particular case. And then there's the gas bus fires as well. So if diesel bus batteries catch on fire and electric bus batteries can catch on fire as well, you're just arguing semantics, really. There's just no point.
EEVblog dismisses my concern over electric bus fires by stating that other buses can burn down too, in large part due to the battery, so it's all semantics at that point. I think he missed my point here, and in a way also proved it. Of course, other types of buses can also catch on fire, and of course the battery is a large part of it. The thing is, an electric bus battery is much bigger. While I don't think electric buses catching fire is the most immediate problem with them, electric vehicle fires are starting to become a problem. To quote from this NBC article, on April 17th, when firefighters responded to a 911 call at around 9:30 p.m., they came upon a Tesla Model S that had crashed, killing 2 people and was now on fire. They extinguished it, but then a small flare shot out of the bottom of the charred hulk. Firefighters quickly put out those flames. Not long after, the car reignited for a 3rd time. According to the article, the firefighters ended up using 28,000 gallons of water to put this one car fire out, which is the amount they use in a month, and what an average American home uses in 2 years. In contrast, a combustion vehicle fire takes around 300 gallons. According to Tesla's first responder guide, putting out a battery fire will take between 3,000 and 8,000 gallons, or 11 to 30,000 liters. So in the best case scenario, you need 10 times more water to put the car out. Tesla's minimum amount is already more than most water tenders can carry. Water tenders are firefighting vehicles specifically designed to carry a lot of water. 3,000 gallons is the capacity of the biggest ones. And this nets you a whole new world of problems. What if an accident happens far away from fire stations and hydrants? What if multiple electric cars catch fire in a pileup on the highway, or God forbid an electric bus? You get the idea. So my point wasn't the existence of a fire risk, rather the severity of it. This was a minor point of mine though, since battery bus fires are not common. Moving on. Speaking of batteries, their construction and disposal are very polluting, not to mention the occasional slave labor involved in the mining of the necessary rare earth metals.
Okay, if you're going to use this argument about electric buses, you have to do them the same and more so for electric cars. Yeah, good luck with that. The electric car future revolution is already here. Sure, it's a fair point to bring up, and we need to probably do better in this regard, but it's not an argument against them. That's just silly. These things can be fixed.
EEVblog makes 2 points here. A, if I criticize slave labor for BEVs, then I have to do the same for electric cars, and good luck with that since the electric car future is already here. First off, will I criticize electric cars? Hell yeah, I think they suck, though they suck a bit less than combustion cars. Also, good luck with that. You know, it's possible to criticize things even if they're becoming widespread and popular. EEV's second point, I guess point B then, is the following. The slave labor involving battery production is not an argument against BEVs because it can be fixed. The position that slave labor in battery production can be eliminated in the future doesn't automatically give us permission to invest into such an industry in the present. And of course, most of our gadgets contain rare earth metals, so in a way we are already complicit in slave labor. The crucial difference though is that current gadgets don't really have a better alternative, unless you seriously consider living the Amish life or something, while electric buses do have that alternative in the form of trolley buses, which have comparable costs and need significantly less rare earth metals. Further problem is that electric buses aren't a good option where public transit is needed the most, i.e. developing countries. Electric buses are much more expensive as it turns out, costing up to twice as much as diesel buses.
So it's not just about the lower initial price here, and this 100% capacity thing, like you're going to have only 50% the capacity here. As I said, we're not starting a city from scratch and going, oh, we're going to buy 500 buses or 1,000 buses. You've already got all the existing bus transport infrastructure in place. You've already got the roads, the buses are already running diesel or gas-powered buses. The argument is whether or not you want to replace them with electric buses. And the private company that I visited, they've done the test, they've run the numbers on it, and they said, yeah, we're going electric buses. Thank you very much.
EV Block says my developing world example doesn't work because the cities have pre-existing rolling stock which then can be replaced by BEVs, which are better on the long run. In the specific situation he described, sure. Within the dichotomy of BEV and diesel bus, BEVs can make sense. We are in agreement here. But in situations where there isn't a well-developed system, when there is just a small rudimentary network, then the main priority becomes adding more capacity. Most developing countries don't have a large pre-existing transit network that you can just transition into electric buses. You don't even need to go to Africa for such examples. Kiev and most major cities in Ukraine are in dire need of additional buses, or were before the war. In the wake of multiple revolutions and economic crises, in the last 30 years, municipal bus systems were abandoned due to a simple lack of funds. Private carriers took over most bus transit with woefully inadequate quality and capacities. They had to because very often there was nothing else. And this problem exists even today, though less clear. For example, Kiev has around 800 municipal buses as a 2.9 million city. In contrast, Budapest has around 1,500 as a 1.7 million city. Kiev would need at least 1,000 buses yesterday. The quickest solution is to buy buses with the lowest upfront cost, even though they're more expensive in the long run. As I've alluded to in my original video, sheer upkeep is not the only thing we have to factor in here. The lack of public transit can cause invisible losses that are very hard to measure, but they are there nonetheless. In the case of Kiev and cities like it, BEVs are a good on-paper solution, but city or even state budgets are not infinite, especially when it comes to public transit. BEVs might be a better financial decision long-term, but a bad socio-economic decision short and mid-term, plus the aforementioned ethical concerns. On top of this, to maintain the same capacity, you generally need 10 to 20% more BEVs than trolley or diesel buses, depending on the charging method. More on that later. So how is Kiev solving its public transit deficit? Well, the municipal operator plans on purchasing 137 trolley buses, or did so anyway before the war. Additionally, in 2020, they bought 200 diesel buses, and in 2021 they announced a tender for 100 more. Although now they'll just be using captured Russian armor or something. So if you're in dire need of a public transit system, you should focus on putting as many vehicles on the lines as you can. Also, since diesel buses aren't much more expensive to maintain than electric buses, we can take a look at this 2020 case study from Shenzhen, China, where the entire urban bus fleet was converted to BEVs. According to their findings, without state subsidies, diesel buses have a lower cost of ownership over the bus lifetime of 8 years. Now, diesel buses will catch up sometime after the 8-year mark, but their upfront cost is still much lower. So for developing countries that are in need of a bus transit system, most often the cheapest option is the most reasonable. The fact that electric buses will compensate for their costs in a decade is little solace to the people who won't have access to good public transit for years to come. Whereas if you bought more diesel buses for the same amount of money, you could have covered a larger area with more lines and served more people. It's nice that electric buses make financial sense after a decade, but that's not enough. Public transportation is more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's transportation for the public. People in the EV community seem to forget that sometimes. So in my view, if you have two options for transit, and one is somewhat more expensive on the long run, but serves a lot more people, then people should take precedence over sheer budget numbers. You know, imagine some city hall representative showing up to an impoverished area with no public transit and telling people the good news that the city has finally invested in public transit. We have invested in electric buses, but they won't be running here just yet. Since they are very expensive, we could only buy about half the needed amount for now, with the second half coming in 5 years. So just 5 more years of degradation and poverty, and you'll have public transit. Why didn't you buy cheaper buses and cover everyone instead? Well, absolutely. And the vast majority of traffic pollution is coming from cars. The more buses you have, ideally the more cars you can take off the road. Even if all your buses are diesel, it's still a huge enough reduction in total emission, which then lowers the social cost of deaths from pollution. As I mentioned before, Budapest has around 1,500 diesel buses in regular operation, compared to 690,000 cars in the city, plus 585,000 cars in the suburbs. If you're aiming to reduce pollution, you want to cut back on car use first. Diesel buses are almost nothing compared to individual motor traffic, and they give a net reduction in emissions, thus a net reduction in social costs. To sum up, I agree that BEVs can be more cost effective in the long run. The data does seem to balance out, but the numbers aren't that far apart, plus I think we must consider the social aspect as well. We are doing public transit for the people, not for accountants. Wait, did I just imply that accountants aren't people? So for developing countries, I believe diesel buses are hands down the best way to start. For developed countries though, that can afford more expensive hardware, it's the autonomous trolleybus, assuming other forms of transit don't make sense on the particular route, such as trams, trains, and so on. So in terms of trolleybuses, EV blog opens with two arguments. One, I shoot down my previous argument because autonomous trolleybuses also have batteries which can also catch fire.
This one is interesting. He's shooting down his own trolleybus argument, of course, by saying, oh, yeah, use these autonomous trolleybuses which have a smaller battery in them. Well, if you're going to make your bus electric, you've got the same battery fire problems that he's talked about. What, that's suddenly not a problem anymore because it's a smaller battery. The buses I looked at had 328 kilowatt hour battery packs in them, as opposed to my Ioniq EV, which has a 38 kilowatt hour, so roughly order of magnitude bigger battery.
Yes, autonomous trolleybuses can also catch fire, but don't you think there's a difference between a 30 and 400 kilowatt hour battery fire? This isn't a Boolean yes battery / no battery situation. We're in a spectrum here. The more you scale up the battery, the more severe your problems can get. EV Blog's second point is the power up.
Actually putting the wire infrastructure in place for all this sort of stuff. It's a huge cost, it's a huge amount of red tape, it takes years and years, whereas electric buses, you simply just drive them out. It's a complete no-brainer.
According to an EV stuff process, if autonomous trolleybus equals yes battery and yes wires, and electric bus equals yes battery and no wires, then electric bus better because no wires. Once again, things are a bit more complicated than that. Having a bigger traction battery can cause problems and complications that wouldn't be present with a smaller traction battery, or at least they would be far more manageable. For example, a bigger battery means more weight.
Last year, SEPTA bought a bunch of battery-powered buses, right?
Oh, they sure did.
And they decided to deploy them on former trolley bus routes. That's where they had electric buses that draw power from overhead lines.
Right. They spit on the graves. Yeah.
Yes. And what happened is apparently they had to take the buses out of service last February and didn't tell anyone, and because all the frames cracked. The batteries are too heavy. What they could have used were the overhead lines.
The wires are already up. We don't even have to put up some goddamn wires. They're already up.
This was just incredibly embarrassing that like they bought these new high-tech buses that use worse technology than what they already had. You know, it's more extractive. They need these big lithium batteries as opposed to just some copper wires over the street. And they broke just immediately.
I would also like to add that even if we'll have lighter batteries in the future, they most likely won't be able to just plug them into our existing electric buses. They were designed with the battery weight in mind, so reducing it might lead to erratic driving characteristics, or the bus tipping over in sharper curves or something. Just something to keep in mind. Aside from battery weight, there is a further issue you have to consider when running buses off a big battery, and nothing else. A few years ago, Moscow replaced all its trolleybuses with battery electric buses, and then winter came. Turns out batteries are very much susceptible to this thing outside the showroom called weather. If it's too cold or too hot, batteries lose efficiency. Not only that, but they also have to power the heating or air conditioning, both of which are massive power draws. Trolleybuses solve this problem by having a separate centralized power source which is not susceptible to the weather, unless it's a tornado or something. So it seems to me that by forcing the power source on board of the bus, we're creating all these completely avoidable problems for no good reason. Since trolleybuses and BEVs cost around the same, including the cost of setting up the infrastructure, for at the end, the only remaining potential argument for battery buses is maintenance costs. And oh boy, let's just get into it, I guess.
And here's a cost-benefit analysis of electric city buses. This has got some interesting stuff, including trolley buses. Now, of course, you have 0 units for natural gas and 0 units for diesels. You don't have to maintain the grid and charging systems. But look at this trolley bus, 326 compared to 5. That's the cost of the electrical grid and maintaining the wires and the catenary system and the whole, maintaining the whole show for trolley buses. So his main argument for trolley buses is shot down right there.
Wow. Electric bus versus trolley bus infrastructure maintenance is 5 to 326? If that's true, that would be huge. Well, man, I looked through this document and Comic Sans title, spelling mistakes, no references. There is a table where they list components of a diesel bus, and then under diesel bus it says yes in every line, and under electric bus it says no. Some very serious research you got there. Besides the effects of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, electric buses is the most promising for the urban transit due to the space occupied by the cars and bicycles to transport the same number of passengers. Oh, so we're anti-bicycle now? Also, if we decide to take the graphs at face value, lifetime cost of EL versus diesel are actually not that different. Lifetime cost of EL versus diesel in health. Okay, what emission standards are we talking about? Because that would be one of the key points for this comparison. Also, I have a sneaking suspicion that they haven't factored in the reduction in healthcare costs due to gas cars on the road on the account of having public transit. Or have they? Who knows? There aren't any sources. And wait, it says healthcare / cost of carbon. What is the cost of carbon? Is it emission quotas? Okay, so this graph. Electric bus versus other transport units. Once again, where did these numbers come from? There aren't any references. I assume all of this is in euro. They specify for BEVs and diesel, but not for CNG and trolley. How is maintaining trolley wires 65 times more expensive than electric bus infrastructure? How How big of a network are we talking about? How long is the trolleybus line? How many of them are there? Also, how many chargers are we talking about? If trolley infrastructure really was 65 times more expensive to maintain, then how come poorer Eastern European countries can afford to run trolleys? Money's up for this paper anyway. What is this? Case study of GSB line Echo 1. Okay. E-bus versus diesel bus APO 5. I guess that's Cyrillic for Euro 5. Daily exploitation cost of diesel and electric bus. Okay, we got tiers per day, daily maintenance, registration per day, water, electric per day. So the total for diesel is 396.44 euro per day, and for electric it's 201 euro. Okay, they not using this study for anything really. In the next part of this video, EV did a positive versus negative list, just like I did in my original video, and that was a mistake of mine. I shouldn't have made such a list comparison, because these things can be very manipulative. Through deliberate manipulation, or just unconscious bias, I might end up overemphasizing the negatives for the things I don't like, and the positives for the things I do like. This is not based on any hard data, as you yourself point out. At best, this would just be some food for thought. At worst, manipulation. It's very similar to what Prager does, and I should have been more responsible. We did the same thing though, to which I can levy the same criticism. These lists are all objective and don't prove anything by themselves. I believe I did find a more reliable source for the cost of battery versus trolley buses. Let's check out this article and cost comparison by Martin White at the Urban Transport magazine. He writes, in the last few years, transport planners have increasingly been concerned about the need to move towards a low-carbon/zero carbon future. Even for cities with extensive electric metro and light rail services, the aim is to replace their fossil fuels in their bus systems. The most popular answer has been to look at the battery electric bus. On the face of it, this seems such a simple and attractive solution. Just buy the bus, and as the Americans would say, it's good to go. If anybody in a city with trolley buses suggests that the trolleybus system could play a significant role, battery bus advocates will point to the BEV and say, look, no wires. But in real life, there are few magic solutions. The proposition that BEVs are much simpler and cheaper to install than trolleybuses may well be illusory. After all, there is so much in common between BEVs and battery trolleybuses. Traction motor, power electronics for control of speed and braking, batteries and chargers are shared in common. And wait for wait, power consumption will be very similar. The main difference is how power is transferred and stored, but this does not seem so fundamentally different that it should lead to a significant difference in the capital investment required. Wright compares three systems here: BEV with overnight depot charging, BEV with on-route charging, and battery trolleybus. Of course, such comparisons can be difficult, as he correctly points out. It is not possible to produce conclusive proof that one solution or the other is better, whatever that would mean to an individual planner. First, obtaining precise costs for the individual components is very difficult because of issues such as commercial confidentiality. Moreover, much will depend on the individual local circumstances of a particular city and specific routes. What does emerge from the following is that large-scale electrification using battery buses can require capital expenditure of a similar order of magnitude as for an equivalent trolleybus system using battery trolleybuses with in-motion charging. Comparing Toronto's depot charging system, Vancouver's en-route charging system, and also Vancouver's battery trolleybus system, Wright comes up with the following numbers. As you can see, based on this calculation, a battery trolleybus system setup costs around the same as an electric bus system. This article is of course linked in the description, so if you want to go over the exact details of how this is calculated, feel free to read through it. BEVs, whether charged en route or in the depot, need a lot of very costly infrastructure. Most of it is invisible to the average person though, while trolleybus infrastructure is much more apparent. This might cause some people to believe that the latter is much more costly than the former, which is simply not the case. Wright's conclusion is as follows. As all three options are of a similar order of magnitude, it is important that transit planners, and in particular political decision makers, be aware that BEVs are by no means the cheap and simple solution that many seem to think. And conversely that, contrary to appearances, an installation using battery trolleybuses with in-motion charging can be financially competitive with battery electric buses. So, in the end, we can say that battery trolleybus systems are very much competitive with BEVs, even in smaller towns. In the Czech Republic, Ústí-nad-Labem is a 90,000 inhabited city with 11 trolleybus lines. As a side note, there used to be tram lines, but those were dismantled during Soviet times. As you can see, even in a city of 90,000, trolleybus lines or even tram lines can make sense. Moreover, there's also Jihlava, a 50,000 inhabitant city with 7 trolleybus lines. Trolleybuses can make sense even in smaller towns, not just larger cities. They are far more versatile than most people would think. Alright, so it's a tie, right? Seems like BEVs and trolleybuses are about par in terms of costs, so cities and towns are free to choose which one makes the most sense in their particular area. Not so fast. One huge glaring issue with electric buses is the large-scale use of rare earth metals, which I believe is completely defensible. Today, we have a choice between two viable systems. Both contain rare earth metals, but one significantly less than the other. Therefore, as a consequentialist, I say let's invest in the one that contains less. That way, we don't generate as much demand for rare earth metals, which ultimately means we contribute less to monetary slavery. They've just shown this point off like a which was a bit disappointing. This is the big reason why I don't like electric cars either. Aside from not solving any of the main problems of individual transit, such as space and efficiency, I feel like many electric vehicle advocates tend to focus on the tech and on the people behind it. It's nice to have a shiny new electric car, but the materials for it came from people working in slavery and conditions, including children, for a few dollars per day without any regard for work safety. And the idea that one day we will develop batteries that won't need rare earth metals, therefore it's okay to invest in EV systems now, is something that I can't accept. It's this smug tech pro attitude of just hand-waving concerns. Yeah, slavery, whatever. Elon will just invent some tech magic and solve it. Don't worry. Even if we know for certain that we will have practical rare earth metal construction batteries in 5 years already. Imagine going down to the mines, working for BEV manufacturers, and telling the miners, hey folks, guess what? For now you might be suffering under horrible conditions extracting the materials for our environmentally friendly electric buses, but soon we'll have batteries that won't need them. That means you only have to work in this hell for 5 more years. Isn't technology wonderful? Let's be ethical and responsible and minimize human suffering now, not in some hypothetical future or even near future. As far as I'm concerned, everything else is just an excuse. But really, my overarching problem with electric buses is that they are very often used as a fake solution in order to ignore systemic problems. Our cities are ridden with pollution, noise, and over-motorization that ruined our social spaces, but many politicians would rather just have nicer buses running in the same system without ever touching on the status quo of car dependency. You know, instead of a diesel bus, there is now an electric bus stuck in the 8-lane traffic jam in the city center. We did it, folks. Our public transit is now zero emission. Alright, so this was my follow-up video on electric buses. Hopefully I answered your questions and clarified my own position a bit more. Thank you once again for all the feedback on the original video and for keeping things civil.
Is a fair okay. I would put it above Chorusty. I like it, and I think the spectacle of the fight is valuable. You know? I think it's you know, pretty darn cool. Who says it's bad? People tend to diss on Cage Dragon. That's okay. Up next, we have the Stray Demon. So there are 3 Asylum Demons in this damn game. First, it's the Asylum Demon, then the Stray Demon when you revisit the Asylum, and then later the Fire Sage, Demon Fire Sage or whatever, which is the same except with fire attacks. Doing 1 reskin, okay, I say this knowing we have Elden Ring in our near future. Doing 1 reskin is acceptable, doing 2 is way too much. I'm going to blame Stray Demon here because it is a reskin shot in the same basic area. This is literally the most boring fight. Okay? The attacks of the Stray Demon do crazy damage and have huge range, but they are so god-awfully slow. Once you know what's happening, it's so easy to deal with them. The main threat with the Stray Demon is that, in addition to the attacks that the Asylum Demon has, the Stray Demon can also just do this big wave of magic energy in front of it that has a very weird tell. But once you know that it's coming and where it's coming from, it's that right there. Once you know how to not get hit by that, it's pathetically easy to kill this boss. You know, that's it. That's the only challenge. It's just knowing what the area of effect of that attack is. Once you know that, it's it. Like, the fight is done. You've beaten the fight once you know that. And this boss has so much health. It takes so long to kill him and to take all his health down. And they kind of gank you with the boss to begin with by having you fall into this area from the arena of the Asylum Demon. I don't know. The main issue that I have with this fight is that it's boring and they do a poor job telegraphing the new mechanic. I think that this boss would go into offensive. Yeah, I don't think it's as bad as the Moonlight Butterfly. I'm going to go with inoffensive here, I think. Stray Demon. Definitely below Chorus Demon. Definitely. After that, we have the Chaos Witch Quelaag. Quelaag slaps. Let's all get the titty shot. Quelaag's a super nice fight. The 2 things that Quelaag, the fight, really sell you on are A, positional awareness, and B, it's good to stay close to the boss. See, Quelaag will run up to you and do these melee attacks, but they'll pass right over your head if you're close to the spider body that she occupies, which means that you're actually incentivized to be bold and stay close to her, which who wouldn't with, you know, a body like that. She also vomits fire on the ground, which means that you have to be aware of where you're backing up to, and I think both of these are new mechanics in Dark Souls 1. Up to this point, I don't think any boss has implemented area denial in the way that she has, or encouraged you to stay close in the way that she has. She has this big AoE attack like that, which is poorly telegraphed. I don't really like that it's poorly telegraphed, but it also has a pretty obvious tell, and there's only one of them, so... I really like this boss. It's a really good boss fight. Have you watched Monster Musume? Yes, I have. Oh, I also like the fact, this is just an aesthetic thing. I really love the fact, first of all, the model looks great. I mean, the enemy model. Like the spider, too. Not just the fact that she's naked from the top up, but, you know, the actual spider looks awesome. And when she swooshes her sword, you can see spider webs in the fire. It's really cool. Look at this. I love that. That's a bit of detail right there that I just never get over how cool it is. Just this big, like, sweep with like a spider web. I just love looking at it. It's not the easiest fight in the world until you get a handle of it, and once you get a handle of it, it's very easy to master. And I like fighting. Once you figure out their mechanics, they become very easy to manage because it really was a knowledge game, you know? I'm proud to introduce Chaos Witch Quelaag to the very first great boss. Right up there. I'm very, very proud to have her occupy the very first spot. Then we have Ceaseless Discharge. So Ceaseless Discharge is a weird fight. There are two ways to kill Ceaseless Discharge. First of all, this boss has high health and very high damage. It's also physically one of the largest bosses in all of the From Software games. It is colossal. The normal way to kill this guy is you... Okay, well, this guy's going to do a bow, I guess. That's an option. He will punch forward, and then you stab his arm while he hold... Yep, and then you hit it. And he has a ton of health, and it takes a really long time. And there you go. And now the same thing's going to happen again, and... Yep. Anytime. And now you hit, and this continues for several minutes. Incredibly boring. There's a second way to kill it, though, which is that if you get his dead sister's clothing, thus enraging him, he will rip out one of his own arms, and then he will chase you if you run there all the way to the far end of the arena. He will lose footing on a platform underneath him, and then he'll jump at you, and he will lose his footing on the platform, and knock him out, fall into the ground. I don't know if that's going to be shown here, but I think it's a different enough way of killing it, but I think it's worth Ceaseless Discharge. Easy kill. That's the first thing that shows up in the autocomplete. There we go. I'm just going to show it. No audio. You run all the way over here. Ah, look at this frame rate. Lovely. This video must have come out in like 2011 or something. He'll jump after you, grab onto the platform. See? This guy does what he does. And you hit his hand. A few times. He can't damage you. You're safe, you know? And then he dies. And they do a poor job communicating this, but the reason he dies is because he falls down. You break his grip, and he falls all the way down to the ground, which kills him. That additional way of killing him is interesting, but I don't know if that compensates for the fact that the boss itself isn't interesting. You know? Like, I don't know if it's fair to say, like, okay, the boss design is really boring, but there's a cool way of killing him that allows you to bypass how boring the boss design is. I don't know if that's an acceptable answer, but the fact that that option is available makes this fight feel inoffensive to me. Because I'm not bored when I do it, because I have fun getting his sister's clothing and then running over to do the quick kill method. That I enjoy, but it doesn't make up for the fact that I feel like if the only way to kill Ceaseless Discharge was through that method, I would actually like it more. Does anyone else agree with me? That if the only way to beat Ceaseless Discharge was to have it be a puzzle boss where you have to run him back and then, like, knock him off, that might actually make it okay for me. But the fact that, from my first experience playing the game when I didn't know about the fast kill method, I just, like, thought it was and I don't know. Anyway, moving on. The Great Grey Wolf Sif. So, Sif is an amazing fight from an aesthetic and lore perspective. First of all, the idea of fighting a great wolf that has a massive sword in its mouth is just, like, really cool. And also, when you know all the lore behind Sif, which I'm not going to get into, I'm going to try not to make this another lore video because it rambled about Dark Souls lore enough. Like, that's pretty cool. The fight itself sucks. I hope you can all agree with this. The fight itself with Sif is uninteresting and kind of janky. Basically, it's just like they'll do big, high damaging spins, and you poke at their legs a bit, she jumps away, and then you do it again. I don't feel like there's much of a dance or engagement there, and the camera goes full wonky when you're trying all this. You can de-lock, of course, but it never feels right fighting her. You know? Like, yeah. That said, from a lore perspective and for how fondly I feel of this fight, I can't hate it, you know? Yeah, see, it just, yeah, she can just pop around for a while, and it just... It is iconic, but from a mechanical gameplay perspective, it's also far from high. I can't give her a pass because of the lore. I think that Sif is okay. You know, I think people speak fondly of Sif largely for lore reasons. I think that Sif is okay. I don't think she's inoffensive. I would put her in between the Bell Gargoyle and the Gaping Dragon. I think the Bell Gargoyle is a better fight. I think that Sif in a lore and like gameplay, like in terms of the immersion and the experience, Sif is above these fights. But in terms of like the actual boss fight, I think that okay is an acceptable place for her. Then we have the Iron Golem. So the Iron Golem is kind of a weird one. You can knock the Iron Golem off the cliff pretty easily if you know how to. It will stagger for a long time if you do enough damage to its legs, and it might fall back if you keep doing damage. If you know how to position the Iron Golem for it, it can be an effective quick kill method. But you still have to do a lot of damage to get it to that point. The main issue that I have with this fight is that its grab is really frustrating to deal with. See, you just arrive at this fight after going through Sen's Fortress. You might not have found the gate key, the secret pass, and you might not have found the secret bonfire either. And the grab is not intuitive. His axe attacks are easy to figure out, but his grab has a kind of weird timing hitbox, which if you're hit by it, you're basically guaranteed to be dead. If Iron Golem is better positioned, because he can just throw you right off. I do not like, I don't like grabs in this game. In a lot of these games, grabs have always helped me years. That being said, I do like the Iron Golem. One thing that I like the Iron Golem a lot for is the fact that if you don't kill the giant that's throwing the big explosive balls around, it will continue to pelt the boss arena with those bombs while you fight. It's like a good way of getting you to pay attention to the outside world, basically, while you're doing the fight. And I kind of like that, you know, a reward for being thorough with your exploration. It's also kind of a really badass fight. I think it's a good fight. I would put the Iron Golem good, but below Asylum Demon, because I still think the Asylum Demon is vitally good at giving you like an intro of the game's mechanics. Then we have Crossbreed Priscilla. This is in the Painted World. This is an underwhelming boss fight. There's a cool invisibility mechanic where she will float and you have to see where she is based on footsteps in the snow around her. And then you deal damage to her. But there's nothing really interesting about the fight outside of that mechanic. In fact, I would say that's the only thing about that fight that really warrants mentioning, and the rest of it is just a pretty standard, like, she will attack you when you are in front of her type deal. There's really not much of a challenge, and by the time you are able to beat the Painted World of Ariandel, she's gonna be really, really, really easy. Like, she's kind of under-leveled, don't you think? For the point that you fight her in the game, it feels like she should have been stronger than she is. Like, maybe 50% more health? I don't know. Maybe that's kind of the point. She's not supposed to be this warrior. She does let you go, after all. You don't have to fight her. Look at her, yeah, see, when she's not invisible, she just kind of stands and sweeps in front of her. You can just circle straight. I think it's supposed to be sad. I understand that, and I understand that there is a kind of narrative value to, like, feeling like you're beating up on a boss that doesn't want to fight, who can't stand up to you, but I don't think they nailed it here. If they wanted us to feel sad, I think they could have made her more pathetic. Sif limps when you get her to low health. I liked that about the Sif fight. See, like, look at this fight, right? I mean, like, this is not a very interesting fight mechanically. The invisibility mechanic is interesting, and the best part of the invisibility mechanic is that Crossbreed Priscilla gave way to one of the best fights of any boss ever. which is going to be Sister Frida. So Crossbreed Priscilla's mechanics are directly referenced in Dark Souls 3. And when they're done there, they're done brilliantly. But this fight is like, this fight's inoffensive. I'll put her there. But that's okay. Don't worry, guys. One thing that people don't understand in retrospect about these games is that Dark Souls 1's reputation was saved by the DLC. Because the bosses in the first half of Dark Souls 1 are not generally that interesting, and the bosses in the later half are generally kind of bad. The DLC, though, whew, we'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there. They really learned their shit. So people are going to be mad at me about this. Ornstein and Smo, I genuinely think is a bad boss fight. I actually think it does a worse job establishing the idea of managing multiple targets than the Bell Gargoyles. The reason for this, there are two reasons. First of all, this boss fight is trivially easy with any magic or ranged ability. These bosses cannot respond to being pelted from range. The reason for that is because their movement and mechanics are paced in a way which allows for you to run away from them infinitely. The reason you need to be able to do that is because these bosses, and this is the main sin of these bosses, don't allow you to create openings. You can't create an opening with Ornstein and Smo. You don't have the ability to. They give you openings when their attack patterns overlap in ways that allow you to sneak in hits on either one of them. But that's you responding to them rather than you forcing the fight. The issue is that their attacks will frequently overlap in really boring, uninteresting, and unreliable ways. Ornstein's kind of glitchy. He can use lightning attacks from behind Smo, and his charge attack can glitch out and like randomly hit you out of nowhere. Oftentimes you'll be put in positions where there is just no way to avoid taking damage. Now, there is a way to no-hit this fight, and I know because I did it. In my Soul Level 1 run of this, I no-hitted the fight, which is not easy. And you know what it was? Fucking boring. Because all you do is run away from them over and over, waiting until Ornstein does his dash attack forward, and then you sneak in 1 or 2 hits, and then you continue the run. It's not interesting. It doesn't lead to you engaging with the mechanics that effectively. There are plenty of other dual boss fights in the From Software game series that are way more interesting and better managed than this. Like, seriously, it is just not that good of a fight. It's just not. No, I legitimately believe that Godskin Duo is a more interesting fight, and better managed in a like dual fight perspective. I don't think this fight is that good. Now, another issue is that the second phase is significantly easier than the first phase, because once you beat one of the 2 dudes here and you're fighting off the empowered version in the second phase, usually fighting Smo because it's easier to kill Ornstein first, you find that individually the mechanics of these bosses is really, really, really boring. You're literally watching a guy take the fight in an interesting way. No, and I want to be clear about something, okay? If the only interesting way to do a fight is hit trading, that is a design flaw. It should be possible to no-hit these fights while still playing them in an interesting way. Because if the only way to engage with them in a fun way is to dive in, accept that you're going to take some hits, dart out, heal, and continue, which is admittedly the way most people play, that means that the only fun way to play is a way which requires you to take damage, and the only way to avoid damage while playing is to play in an unfun way. Now, there's going to be a lot of variability with how I apply these standards, but I seriously urge you, go back and play Ornstein and Smo Soul Level 1 like I did. It is boring. It's a boring fight that is easily trivialized with range abilities, that is glitchy, that is inconsistent with opening windows you can take advantage of. And once you get to the second phase, it's a lot easier because these bosses individually aren't that interesting mechanically. You just pretty easily kill Super Ornstein or Super Smo. Yeah. You may hold me to this. You may say it's controversial. If you have fond memories of this, it's because you hit traded. And there is nothing wrong with hit trading, but there is something wrong with a fight that only becomes interesting if you're willing to take damage. I hope everyone can understand that. Can you think of some video game bosses that, when done with like no hit, are still interesting? Yes. Most of the boss fights in all these games. Don't say that it's unreasonable to say that a boss fight should be interesting when done no hit, because almost all the fights in From Software games are interesting when done no hit. In fact, I would argue doing a fight no hit is usually the most interesting way of doing it, because it means that you have to be really vigilant with your dodges, blocks, parries, whatever else. That means you're playing at a really high level of skill and you're engaging with their mechanics. Whereas if you're kind of like over leveled a little bit and you can just take hits and it's not a big deal, you don't really have to engage with the mechanics that much, and it can kind of feel like a steamroll. You understand what I mean? Like beating a boss when you're over leveled over them, like you take a hit, whatever, you know, but having to take no hits, that's interesting. Unless you're fighting Ornstein versus Smo. Under Plague, I've beaten Smo first. I swear to, I've done everything in Dark Souls 1. I've done things you couldn't even imagine. Don't agree using your health as a resource when you're gauging what you can take versus what you do is more skillful than pressing a button reaction movement. Gagsy, are you seriously arguing right now that just hit trading, running away, and healing is more skillful than dodging every attack? What do you... Okay, no, I'm not even engaging with this. No. To be fair, no hit isn't designed to over game. Stop!
Your team has destroyed a turret. An ally has been slain.
CGI. It's a term I'm willing to bet you've heard before, because it's everywhere. This worm, this purple man, everything in between is the work of computer-generated images. Regardless of the benefits or the faults, CGI has found itself as an essential, unanimous part of media production. Which is kind of funny, because just a few decades ago this technology was unnoticed by most of the general public. It was time-consuming, highly technical, and niche. I mean, think about it. Even the most powerful supercomputers of the 60s, 70s, and 80s couldn't hold a candle next to this smart fridge. And while most researchers were using these to make math go faster, CGI could just make funny-looking pictures. The value it would have was not easily apparent, and the skills you would need to get into all this in the first place was not for the faints of heart. Now, I don't want to talk too much about the live-action CGI stuff here, just the pure, good CGI demos and shorts leading up to, let's say, Toy Story.
I mean that if I point at this particular point and tell the computer to move that point by another push-button command, it will move not only that point, but all three lines that are attached to it.
And the delay between it's doing what you want it to is because it's computing all these changes.
That's correct.
CGI has actually been around for quite a while. In the 50s, analog computers could graph out patterns and lines. By the 60s, we would have wireframe demos, morphing of images, but it's not quite what we think of as true CGI today. This decade has a lot of important milestones, sure, but a lot of them look like this. For the more conventional works, we would have to go into the 1970s. One of the most significant demos here was 1972's aptly named Computer Animated Hand. You can see some of the earliest full meshes, shading, and even a human face. Sure, it's slightly uncanny, but I'd argue by this point it was almost more cartoonish than creepy. Following up on this was 1974's Faces and Body Parts, which expanded on the human face and added the elements of speech.
How happy is the little stone that rambles in the road alone, and never cares about careers, and exigencies never fears.
These early tests were groundbreaking, sure, but in the process found themselves deep in the uncanny valley. Not all CGI was being done for research, though. There was a small commercial element to all this even in the early 1970s, namely in advertising and station breaks. You can find several companies putting out demo reels showing any ads they've produced along with the tech demos they've created. These demos could bring in more clients and potentially more employees interested in working with what was at the time a very niche segment of the computer industry. One of my favorites is Maggie Synthavision's 1974 reel.
Guess where I came from? A computer. Me and my hat. And everything else you're going to see in this film.
There's certainly limitations in the CGI of the era, that's apparent, but this is actually one of the most advanced demos I've found. Simple polygonal shapes, flat colors without texture. Cityscapes and cars were quite popular in 80s CGI, but for the 70s, this is astounding. It's a very empty space. You can tell where the world begins and ends, but that's par for the course in most early CGI. By the late 70s, we would start to see the earliest short films using three-dimensional polygons. Here is 1978's On and Off at the Circus. That was disturbing. The circus, the clown, the way this bear floats around. Computing physics in an animation like this wasn't going to happen. A lot of these researchers weren't traditional animators. They came from computer backgrounds, and this was a fun way to show off the cutting-edge tech at the time. Complex backgrounds of anything more than a simple color would be pretty unrealistic to expect. This is 1970s CGI after all. Released the same year, Voyager 2 Encounters Jupiter has aged much better. Having a background of stars was ideal in early CGI. You don't need to worry about rendering more objects. It gives much needed spatial context, and you don't have a black void. Also, having a setting of space makes the lighting a bit more realistic since you only need to account for one light source, the sun. Even with slightly janky animations, the camera moves well, and this is a top-tier demo for the 70s. By the end of the decade, in 1978, the first ray tracing demo was produced. The Complete Angler. It's a bona fide classic. You could call this the birth of Vaporwave. Look at those refractions and reflections. At the end, we get this camera movement into the courtyard, and we get water. Things were moving pretty fast, at least the way I'm describing them. The gap between the early 70s CGI and the late 70s was pretty big, but the 80s, well, it just had a lot more going on. There's a particular fascination with landscapes in the early 80s. Take Peak, an early fractal demo. It's a mountain sitting on a plane in a void. Fractals allowed you to create these models without actually modeling every individual surface, which made it ideal for mountainous terrain. Violiba is another demo from the same year, and I prefer this, not just because it has a Utah teapot at the beginning. There's an amazing sense of scale here, and if you really squint your eyes and shake your head around a lot, it looks like real mountains. A lot of landscapes in these early 80s shorts. Take Carla's Island from 81. We get this approximation of water and weather systems. Two islands on an empty sea. The waves move in a very mathematical fashion. The clouds aren't quite transparent, but the reflections are pretty convincing at first glance. And look how the lighting changes. It's wonderful. You'll notice a trend of a lot of of cities being rendered in this time, especially in advertising. Generally, these would have a low polygon city filled with skyscrapers and streets, devoid of any background. Landscapes and cities could be represented by simple polygonal shapes. They don't need to move around, so you don't need to animate parts of the character, so a lot of this has aged decently well. Early 80s demos would generally avoid shadows. You might notice these shadowed gradients on objects, but it always looks really harsh. One of my favorites, and one of the most unsettling shorts, is 1981's Adam Powers' The Juggler. As he keeps juggling, he warps reality, and he keeps juggling, and then he warps reality, and then he disappears. The music doesn't help ease the tension in the air. This feels like it defines a lot of the early 80s CGI. Overly saturated colors set in space. Most objects don't.
Shut down. An ally has been slain.